Hello everybody, welcome to More Chainsaws Needed, where, because I love horror, thrillers and suspense, I am going to talk, rant, rave about, review and recommend movies, TV series and books in those genres for you guys as I draw. Last time, we took a look at a very serious horror movie about a horrible life form from outer space that gets inside you through your mouth, grows inside you, and bursts out of you, killing you and ready to kill all those around you. This time, we're going to talk about a completely different horrible life form from outer space that gets inside you through your mouth, grows inside you, and bursts out of you, killing you and ready to kill all those around you. Only that this time, it's a horror comedy. It's one of those movies that horror gorehounds know quite well, but for many reasons it may not be as well known around other circles, at least not as much as the next movie the director made. Who was the director, you ask? Well, hey, Fred Dekker, the man who gave us the Monster Squad and the legendary line, Wolfman has snarks. But before those plucky kids faced Dracula and his monsters, Fred Dekker made his director debut with a love letter to B-movies of old, by grabbing every single trope that he could find, mixing them with a good dose of humor, an excellent cast, and one homecoming night that no one will ever forget. So grab a cup of your favorite coffee and join me as we talk about this wonderful blend of horror and comedy from the 80s, Night of the Creeps. Fred Dekker is one of those horror directors whose rise to fame seemed to be light speed. In 1983, he was hired to write a script for Godzilla, which went on to be started on pre-production and never saw the light of day. However, 3 years later, he had two successes in the same year. On one hand, one of his shorter scripts was picked up to be expanded by another writer into the now cult classic House the movie, not House MD, and he was allowed to make his debut as a director with a script he wrote in a week that also became a cult classic and is the subject of today's video. I am getting there, hey. Yes, I know. Yes, this movie was written in a week, but the actual roots of it come about 30 years early. Because see, Night of the Creeps, released in my country under the much less imaginative name Terror Knocks on Your Door, but well, another day I will rant about movie title translations. It's a love letter to all the classic horror movies from decades previous, going for the very classic tale of The Hook, you know, the one where a couple is assaulted by a maniac who escaped from the nearby asylum, but they don't realize it until after the danger is either gone, or they are too close to avoid it. To Aliens Invasions, going through the plucky gang of teens who discover the danger before any adult realizes that there is a danger, and some manage to save the town thanks to the smarts and can-do attitude. Zombies, slasher movies, and all of it mixed with a healthy dose of a fraternity rom-com. Yes! In a way, Night of the Creeps is Night of the Living Dead married Revenge of the Nerd and Halfling with Alien before getting to the theaters. That is weird. And I know that such a mixture nowadays would be seen as a complete and absolute mess. Hell, even originally the box office wasn't exactly kind to this movie. However, all it needed was time enough to that people would actually see it and fall in love with the characters and realize that, strange as it seems, what Fred Dekker gave us was a very original horror movie with some great comedy beats. But before we go on how horror and comedy can mix very well, and how Night of the Creeps is one of those gems that prove that laughter doesn't mean that the scares are less effective, let me give you a quick summary of what is Night of the Creeps about. Some spoilers here, but come on, it's a movie from 1986. I do want to watch it, so I don't go into details past the premise, but there are some things I can't avoid mentioning. We start in 1959 when two aliens are chasing a third one to stop him from releasing a canister from the ship. They are unsuccessful, and said canister crashes into Earth because of course it does. This is seen by a couple on a date, but they confuse it with a falling star. The guy goes to investigate while his date waits in the car. Neither have a good ending. The girl happens to be seen by a recently escaped maniac who kills her with an axe, while the boy finds a canister from which a slug comes and jumps into his mouth. No matter how much time it passes, one thing that is common in horror movies is that we really need to stop people from poking at things that fell from space. But that's a rant for another day. In 1986, in the same college that the couple went to before the gruesome ends, we meet Chris Romero and his friend JC. Chris is doing the Romeo thing where he's suffering from a lost love, but upon seeing another gorgeous girl, in this case sorority sister Cynthia Cronenberg, forgets all about the other love and decides to try and woo her. Or more precisely, send JC to find out her name and if she has a boyfriend. She has one. It is then when Chris comes with the amazing idea that the thing he needs to get Cynthia to leave her boyfriend and date him is to join the same fraternity that said boyfriend, Brad, is the head brother. This is despite JC insisting that the one thing Chris needs to do is simply, talk to Cynthia. Brad obviously is not going to let two geeks join his fraternity, but he tells them that if they can get a dead body from a medical center in campus and put it in their rival fraternity doorsteps, they will be considered for brotherhood. Chris and JC manage to stumble their way into a secret lab where the frozen body of the guy we saw in 1959 Get Slugged is kept. But when the body starts moving, Chris and JC do the smart thing and flee. Unfortunately, they leave the door open and a walking dead corpse behind. Enter Detective Ray Cameron, a cop who has definitely seen much better days, to investigate the break-in and find the corpse missing, only to be called to the sorority that Cynthia is a member of because that's where they find the missing body, which is in turn missing half of its head, when it used to be complete before. Quote Detective Ray, "What is this? A homicide or a bad B-movie?" Horror comedies are pretty much as old as the horror genre itself. For example, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was originally both meant to entertain and scare, but in film, the first one registered as such was One Exciting Night from 1922, which was, a silent movie from its era, an entertaining slasher mystery with some inheritance jinx added, and unfortunately blackface. But 1922. However, the real first horror comedy that was actually successful with critics and audiences was the now classic Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein from 1948, directed by Charles Barton. Ironically, neither Abbott nor Costello wanted the film made, but given the success it had, they ended up meeting pretty much every horror creature that the writers could throw at them until the end of their careers. This was actually disliked by Lon Chaney Jr., famous for his Wolfman performance and who played the Wolfman in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which also included Dracula, as played by Bela Lugosi, as he thought that comedy and horror shouldn't mix and that the monsters should not be buffoons. Despite Lon Chaney Jr. misgivings, the comedy horror genre continued to grow, and while it has given us some horrible mistakes, there are also some amazing classics which, if I start listing, will take us all day. We have all kind of mixes, as horror is with very dark humor, comedy around the horror tropes, musicals that become incredibly gory, movies that are incredibly absurd but the cast plays completely straight and thus made the horror within the comedy seem real, parodies of the horror movies, horror comedies for kids, and movies so bad that end up in the category of unintended comedies. And of course, straight horror movies that just so happen to have a comedy relief character that is so good at quipping that they can make us chuckle even in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. Hell, one could say that zombie comedies are now a genre of their own, given how many of those are there. Night of the Creeps is one of those who pokes fun at many classic horror tropes of movies made before it, but despite some absurdities with the premise itself, like the fact that the feared monsters are alien slugs that turn you into exploding zombies, every actor plays their character as if they were making The Exorcist. They might quip and joke in the face of danger, but we see it not as them making fun of said danger or deaths around them, but as a coping mechanism. They joke because not joking would mean going insane. The humor never comes from the horror situation. In fact, the first 10 minutes of the movie are played completely straight. There is no laughter in the 50 sequence, which is also shot in black and white to give it a more authentic feel. The sequence when Johnny is looking for the shooting star that will cause all the problems and his date realizes that they are in the path of the axe-wielding maniac is honestly tense, even if acted a bit wooden, again, following the style of B-movies of the era. The first bit of comedy comes actually when we are before the horror, and JC's, Chris' friend, starts dispensing wisdom that every rom-com main character who decides they are going to marry a girl they just saw should listen to. Hate to break it to you, but it's going to be a real blow. But you are going to have to meet her first. With this, JC establishes himself firmly as a comic relief character, who also happens to be one of the main characters who happens to have a working brain cell. This is a moment where I pause to say that, in the moments before the horror restarts, when Night of the Creeps seems to be turning into a frat comedy, JC is one bright light of the movie. Portrayed by Stephen Marshall, He's one of the best examples of disabled representation I have seen in a horror movie in a long time. There's an argument that he's also queer-coded, but horror movies in the 80s were incredibly gay anyway, so I will not delve much into that. The thing is, he has a very obvious disability that is never explained or commented on except when Brad, Cynthia's boyfriend, kicks his ever-present crutches away. JC's crutches are just part of his character, and Fred Dekker is on record as saying that he just wanted to show that just because a person is disabled doesn't make them less of a person, nor incapable of being funny, brave, loyal, and yes, be an important part of a horror movie. What the script refuses to do is explain why JC needs the crutches, nor make his whole character about them, because he doesn't need a justification for being there. He just exists, lives with them, and Chris, as his best friend, never makes a comment about them, but we can tell that he's considerate about the situation, as he never walks too fast that JC can't follow, even when they are running away from a revived dead body. He also has, JC I mean, the most dangerous habit of pushing buttons that he shouldn't push, but that's a completely different matter. Anyway, 16 minutes of rom-com later, we meet our real hero, Detective Ray Cameron, who is also the king of quips, and unfortunately, we completely lose the humor as we get back to the X-Maniac and The Walking Dead. But all of this helps to the balance and to foreshadow what we will see. Because right before this happens, Chris complains that everything is a joke to JC, and JC replies that yes, everything is a joke, because when we have the choice between laughing or being miserable, he'd rather laugh than being sad. And here is where Fred Dekker shines as a writer and a director. Pretty much all of the comedy in the movie, once the slugs start attacking people, turning them into zombies and exploding their heads to make more slugs, is on the dialogue of both Detective Cameron and JC. In fact, their dialogues alone make the movie incredibly quotable, from Detective Cameron's signature's "Thrill Me" to the line used as the poster tagline, "I got good news and bad news, girl. The good news is your dates are here." What's the bad news? They're dead. Once you see the movie, you can't forget them. Even Chris has a couple of great lines here and there between acting like a normal person would act upon getting their world turned upside down by slug-making zombies. Zombie-making slugs? Same difference. One of the main characteristics of a great horror comedy is that while we, the audience, can laugh and find humor in the worst situations possible, the main characters must take everything seriously. More importantly, the actors must take it seriously. If the actors are laughing and acting like they are not in danger, then we don't believe the danger and the comedy becomes unintended comedy rather than dark comedy. I say this because yes, Ray and JC quip a lot, more than modern movie characters at some points. But because Tom Atkins, Ray, and Steve Marshall, JC, play it perfectly straight, they never feel out of place. Same comes with Jason Lively, Chris, very clear panic and sadness as the events continue, and Jill Whitlow, Cynthia, quiet strength when she decides that no slug is going to ruin her homecoming. While she doesn't count really as a final girl, given the completely different kind of movie, Cynthia is an amazing horror survivor. Not many can rock a white homecoming dress and a flamethrower at the same time. And not only they play it completely straight, but the big sentimental moments of the movie come down precisely to JC and Detective Ray in that order. I can't spoil the JC moment because seriously, if you haven't seen the movie, you need to see it by yourself. But I can talk about most of Detective Ray's backstory. See, he was the one who found the girl from the prologue after she had her meeting with the ex-welding maniac, and to make things worse, she was his ex-girlfriend. That moment kept giving him nightmares, horrible ones all the way up to the beginning of the movie when he was actively suicidal. At one point, we see him make all the preparation needed to check out early, and it's only Chris calling him to tell him the latest horrible news about the slugs what stops him. And that is not the emotional gut punch for his characters, no! We'll have to wait to the end of the movie where I can assure you he's going to thrill you. By this moment, you may also have figured out that Fred Dekker put every single trope of classic horror he could into this little movie. Yes, including the cat scare. And not only that, every single named character is named after a horror director of the time. Chris Romero, James Carpenter, J.C. Hooper, Detective Ray Cameron, Cynthia Cronenberg are quite obvious, but we also have a Detective Landis, a Sergeant Raimi, and Officers Craven and Baba. If that is not a gruesome love letter to the genre, I don't know what it is. Unfortunately, it didn't do well in box office. Like, well, every single slug horror movie that has been there before and since. Seriously, together with Dentist, slugs seems to be poison for horror box office, whereas they both are too gruesome even for gorehounds. And thus, it was demoted to being shown on late TV horror marathons until it really found its audience and became the cult classic that it's today. Night of the Creeps is a very enjoyable movie, as long as you don't mind slugs. If you have a fear for slugs, worms, and things that are similar, yes, you probably should skip this one. I know, say hey, because man, there's a lot of scenes of slugs getting into people's mouths. There's also an incredible amount of frat brothers that are about 30 years old or older, but well, 80s movies never have teenagers who look like teenagers, so that is a feature, not a bug. It's also one of those movies that has two endings, the theater release and the director's cut. Yes, hey, I also prefer the director's cut because it's a little less grim, even if I feel like it's unfair to a character that I like, but then the other ending is unfair to another character, so you don't really get a perfect ending no matter what. And no, I am not going to tell you what happens in each. Again, that is one of those things that you should see for yourself if you haven't yet. So this Halloween, if you are waiting to see something different, I really recommend you hunt a copy of Night of the Creeps for a night that you will never forget. Just remember, keep your mouth shut if you want to live. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessica and Ali Riley, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda, and the most amazing Amy Song, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, written link in the description, as I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked on my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else. In fact, you will get the videos a week before everybody else. And also will get the chance to suggest future subjects for future videos. You can also support me through Ko-fi, and for each coffee, you will get mentioned in 3 future videos. If you can't support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and remember, there is not a problem in the horror genre that cannot be solved with more chainsaws and a cup of good coffee.